You take a DNA test. The results say Northwestern European, British, Dutch, German, Scandinavian, all mixed together. But that pattern didn't form by accident, and it didn't form recently. It's the result of thousands of years of migration, mixing, and a prehistoric landscape that no longer exists. Beneath the North Sea lies Doggerland, a vast land that once connected Britain to Europe. And while it wasn't the single origin of these populations, it played a crucial role in the earliest layer of ancestry shared across Northwestern Europe. To understand what your DNA is really showing, we have to start there, in a world that drowned 8,000 years ago. Here's what geneticists noticed when they started mapping European DNA. Most populations show clear regional boundaries. Mediterranean groups cluster together. Eastern Europeans display distinct patterns. You can trace migrations, invasions, and population replacements through the genetic data. But Northwestern Europeans? They show something different. When you look at populations from Britain, the Netherlands, Germany, Denmark, and Scandinavia, they share higher than expected genetic similarities. Not identical, but overlapping in ways that suggest complex prehistoric connections. Y chromosome haplogroup I1, for example, appears at elevated frequencies across these regions. In Scandinavia, it reaches 30 to 40%. In the Netherlands and Britain, 15 to 20%. These aren't uniform distributions, but they show patterns that point to shared ancient ancestry. Mitochondrial DNA tells a similar story. Certain lineages like H1 and U5 appear throughout Northwestern Europe at frequencies that suggest these populations share deep prehistoric roots. But here's where it gets complicated. This shared ancestry doesn't come from just one source. Modern Northwestern Europeans carry genetic contributions from at least three major ancient populations: Mesolithic hunter-gatherers, Neolithic farmers from Anatolia, and Bronze Age pastoralists from the Eurasian steppe. Each wave brought new DNA, new languages, new technologies. So when DNA tests show you clustering across Northwestern European populations, you're not looking at one ancient homeland. You're looking at the result of thousands of years of mixing. But one piece of this puzzle was completely unknown until recently, and it changes how we understand the earliest layer of this genetic story. Between Britain and continental Europe lies the North Sea, shallow, cold, unremarkable. Except for one extraordinary fact. For most of human prehistory, it wasn't there. Instead, there was Doggerland, a landmass larger than the United Kingdom, stretching from Scotland to Denmark, from eastern Britain to the Netherlands and Germany. This wasn't some narrow bridge. It was a vast inhabited landscape. Rolling plains crossed by massive river systems, coastal marshes rich with fish and birds, forests thick with game. For thousands of years during the Mesolithic period, roughly 10,000 to 6,000 years ago, this was prime hunting territory for prehistoric populations. The people who lived here weren't isolated. Archaeological evidence suggests they were part of broader Northwestern European Mesolithic cultures, sophisticated hunter-gatherers who developed advanced fishing technologies, built seasonal settlements, and maintained long-distance exchange networks. But as the last ice age ended, everything changed. Melting glaciers caused global sea levels to rise by over 120 meters over several thousand years. Doggerland's river valleys flooded first, coastal plains vanished, generation by generation, the land shrank. Then, around 6,200 BCE, catastrophe accelerated the process. The Storegga landslide, a massive underwater collapse off Norway's coast, triggered tsunamis up to 25 meters high. Waves crashed across what remained of Doggerland's lowlands, obliterating coastal settlements. But the tsunami wasn't what ultimately erased Doggerland. Rising seas continued their inexorable advance. Within centuries, nearly the entire landmass disappeared beneath the North Sea. The populations living there didn't vanish. They moved to higher ground. What we now call Britain, the Netherlands, Denmark, and southern Norway were the margins where Mesolithic communities continued to thrive. But here's what's crucial to understand. These Mesolithic populations weren't the only ancestors of modern Northwestern Europeans. They were one layer in a much more complex genetic story. When geneticists analyze ancient DNA from Northwestern Europe, they see a story of transformation. not continuity. Around 6,000 years ago, farmers from Anatolia began spreading across Europe, bringing agriculture, pottery, and new genetic lineages. These Neolithic farmers largely replaced Mesolithic hunter-gatherer populations in most regions. Their DNA became the dominant component. Then, around 4,500 years ago, another massive change. Steppe pastoralists from the Pontic-Caspian region migrated into Europe, bringing Indo-European languages, bronze metallurgy, and yet another genetic contribution that would fundamentally reshape European populations. Modern Northwestern Europeans carry ancestry from all three groups, roughly 30 to 40% from Mesolithic hunter-gatherers, 40 to 50% from Neolithic farmers, and 10 to 20% from Bronze Age steppe populations, though these percentages vary by region. So where does Doggerland fit into this? It represents the Mesolithic hunter-gatherer layer, the earliest significant human population in this region. The people who lived on Doggerland before it drowned likely contributed to the genetic foundation that later mixed with incoming farmers and steppe pastoralists. But claiming modern Northwestern European similarities come solely from Doggerland? That oversimplifies thousands of years of complex genetic history. Here's where the story gets genuinely exciting. We're actually finding Doggerland. Fishing trawlers have been pulling up Mesolithic artifacts from the North Sea for decades. Stone tools, animal bones, antler harpoons. Each find reveals more about the people who lived on this submerged landscape. In recent years, offshore wind farm construction has accidentally uncovered intact archaeological sites, now 40 meters underwater. In 2021, researchers recovered preserved plant remains, worked flint tools, and evidence of structured settlements that show sophisticated adaptation to coastal environments. Some ancient DNA has been extracted from finds in the North Sea region, showing these Mesolithic populations carried maternal lineages like U5 and U4, haplogroups that appear in ancient remains from Britain, the Netherlands, and Scandinavia from the same time period. But here's the important nuance. These shared markers don't prove a single unified Doggerland population. They show that Mesolithic hunter-gatherers across northwestern Europe were related and had been mixing for thousands of years before and after Doggerland's submergence. The land connection facilitated movement and gene flow, but so did boats, coastal migration routes, and long-distance exchange networks that continued even after the waters rose. So what does this mean for your ancestry results? When your test shows clustering across British, Dutch, German, and Scandinavian populations, it's reflecting the complex layering of ancient ancestries that these regions share. That shared genetic signal includes contributions from Mesolithic hunter-gatherers, some of whom likely lived on Doggerland, but also from Neolithic farmers who spread across Europe millennia later, and from Bronze Age steppe populations who introduced new languages and technologies. The reason these Northwestern European populations look more similar to each other than to Southern or Eastern Europeans isn't because they all descend from one Doggerland homeland. It's because they experienced similar waves of prehistoric migration and mixing, creating overlapping genetic patterns. Britain and the Netherlands share genetic similarities not just because of ancient Mesolithic connections, but because both received similar proportions of later Neolithic farmer ancestry and Bronze Age steppe ancestry. Denmark and Norway show even higher similarities because their geographic proximity allowed more recent gene flow and population movements. Doggerland matters not because it was the sole origin of Northwestern Europeans, but because it reveals a critical chapter in human prehistory that was literally erased from the map. For thousands of years, this was productive land supporting thriving Mesolithic communities who hunted, fished, and gathered across a landscape we can now only see through underwater archaeology. When rising seas drowned this world, it didn't erase the people, it scattered them. Their descendants continued living around the new coastlines, eventually mixing with incoming agricultural populations and later steppe pastoralists. The genetic contribution of these Mesolithic populations survives in modern Northwestern Europeans, not as a pure, unchanged lineage, but as one thread in a complex tapestry woven over thousands of years. Understanding Doggerland helps us understand that early Mesolithic layer, but understanding Northwestern European ancestry requires seeing the full picture: multiple migrations, extensive mixing, and continuous transformation over millennia. The true origin of Northwestern Europeans isn't a single homeland beneath the North Sea. It's a story of multiple ancient populations converging, mixing, and creating something new over thousands of years. Doggerland was part of that story, an important part. The Mesolithic hunter-gatherers who lived there contributed to the genetic foundation of modern populations, but they were joined by Neolithic farmers, Bronze Age pastoralists, and countless later movements that shaped the genetic landscape we see today. When you see Northwestern European clustering in your DNA results, you're looking at this complex history compressed into percentages. Not one ancient homeland, but the accumulated legacy of prehistoric Europe's most transformative millennia. If your DNA test showed Northwestern European ancestry across multiple regions, you're carrying the genetic legacy of these ancient population movements, including the Mesolithic hunter-gatherers who once called Doggerland home. Drop your results in the comments. I want to hear which populations showed up for you. Subscribe to History Diary for more investigations into the complex truths behind genetic ancestry, because the real story is always more complicated and more fascinating than the simple version.